Chapter 6. Impromptu Road Trip. The officers' mess at Randolph Air Force Base hummed with the particular energy that only comes from military personnel with unexpected free time. A 24-hour liberty had been granted after 3 weeks of grueling training, a reward for the class's improved performance metrics, though Phantom had delivered the news with all the enthusiasm of someone announcing a tax audit. Smokey leaned against the wall, watching his fellow trainees debate how to spend their precious freedom. Maestro was advocating for a structured study session at the library. Doc was calculating the statistical benefits of simply catching up on sleep. Rook wanted to find a chess tournament. Tank had said only food, which everyone assumed meant finding the largest steak in San Antonio. "This is depressing," Smokey announced, pushing himself off the wall with a dramatic sigh. "We finally get liberty, and your best ideas involve sleep and chess. My grandfather would disown me." "What exactly did you have in mind?" Maestro asked, his tone suggesting he already regretted the question. Smokey's grin spread across his face like a warning sign. "I heard there's an air show at Lackland tomorrow. The Thunderbirds are doing a demonstration." "That's actually not a terrible idea," Rook admitted, looking surprised at her own words. Doc added, already running calculations on his tablet. "Planes," Tank nodded approvingly. "I've already hacked the schedule," Glitch announced, without looking up from her device. "The Thunderbirds fly at 1400 hours. There's also a vintage aircraft demonstration at 1100, and a civilian aerobatics competition at 12:30. "Perfect!" Smokey clapped his hands together. "We'll leave at 0800, spend the day at the air show, and be back before our liberty ends. All we need is transportation." "I'll calculate the most efficient public transportation route," Maestro offered, already reaching for his tablet. "Public transportation?" Smokey looked physically pained by the suggestion. No. An adventure requires proper transportation. Something with character." "Why do I suddenly feel like we're about to commit a felony?" Rook asked no one in particular. "Not a felony," Smokey assured her. "More of a creative interpretation of property rights. Follow me." The instructor parking lot was quiet in the early evening light. Smokey led his reluctant squad between rows of sensible sedans and regulation-appropriate SUVs until they reached the far corner, where a vehicle sat apart from the others like automotive royalty among commoners. "Is that," Doc began. "Thunder's 1967 Cadillac Eldorado convertible," Smokey confirmed, his voice reverent. 8 seats of pure American muscle. He calls it Mjolnir on wheels. The car was a magnificent beast, candy apple red with gleaming chrome accents and white leather interior. It was longer than some aircraft carriers and about as subtle as a sonic boom. "Absolutely not," Maestro stated flatly. "That's Grand Theft Auto." "It's borrowing," Smokey corrected. "Thunder mentioned last week that I should see his car sometime. This is just sometime. The probability of court-martial if caught is approximately 94.7%, Doc calculated grimly. "But the probability of an epic adventure is 100%, Smokey countered. "Besides, I know where he keeps the spare key." "How could you possibly know that?" Rook demanded. Smokey grinned. "He told me. After our last simulator session, he said, 'Young Thornberry, should you ever need to experience the glory of Mjolnir, the spare key rests beneath the thunder rune in the wheel well.'" "And you interpreted that as permission to take his car?" Maestro asked incredulously. "I interpreted it as an invitation to automotive adventure," Smokey replied, already kneeling beside the front wheel. "Ah, here it is." He emerged triumphantly with a key attached to a miniature replica of Thor's hammer. "This is a terrible idea," Maestro stated. "Statistically speaking, 87.3% of Smokey's ideas are terrible," Glitch noted. "Yet they achieve positive outcomes approximately 62.4% of the time through methods that defy conventional probability models." "So we're doing this?" Rook asked, looking around at the group. Tank shrugged his massive shoulders. "Adventure." "I'll start documenting our final days as Air Force cadets," Doc sighed, but he was already moving toward the car. "That's the spirit," Smokey beamed. "Operation Air Show is a go." The next morning found them cruising down the highway in Thunder's massive convertible, the top down, the Texas sun warming their faces. Smokey drove with one hand on the wheel, his aviators reflecting the open road ahead. Maestro sat rigidly in the passenger seat, clutching a meticulously planned itinerary. The others sprawled across the spacious back seats, tank taking up enough space for 2 normal humans. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Maestro muttered, checking his watch for the 17th time in an hour. "Lighten up, Maestro," Smokey replied, gunning the engine to pass a slow-moving truck. "This is what liberty is for. Making memories, taking risks, living life." "Getting court-martialed," Maestro added dryly. "We'll have the car back before Thunder even notices it's gone," Smokey assured him. "He's on a training exercise in New Mexico until tomorrow night." "How do you know his schedule?" Rook asked suspiciously. "I make it my business to know things," Smokey replied with a wink, "especially things that facilitate adventures. I've calculated our optimal return time as 2,100 hours, accounting for traffic patterns, fuel stops, and the statistical probability of Smokey-related delays," Glitch announced from the back seat, where she was simultaneously typing on her tablet and adjusting one of her mismatched socks. "See? We've got it all figured out," Smokey said cheerfully. "Nothing can go wrong." "Those words have a 97.8% correlation with imminent disaster," Doc noted, but he was smiling despite himself. As they approached Lackland Air Force Base, they could see aircraft circling in the distance, preparing for the day's demonstrations. The parking area was already filling with civilians and military personnel alike, all drawn by the promise of aerial spectacle. Smokey found a spot that showcased the Eldorado's magnificence and parked with a flourish. "We have arrived, ladies and gentlemen. Let Operation Airshow commence." The airshow grounds buzzed with activity. Vendors sold everything from model aircraft to aviation-themed t-shirts. Food stalls offered overpriced hot dogs and nachos. Children ran around with toy planes, making zooming noises. But the real attraction was the static display area, where various aircraft sat on the tarmac, open for viewing. Our heroes moved through the crowd, their matching aviator sunglasses and confident strides marking them as military despite their civilian clothes. Smokey led the way, nodding at fellow service members and flashing his most charming smile at everyone else. "Look at that," he said, pointing to a gleaming F-22 Raptor. "That's what we're working toward, people. The pinnacle of air superiority." The F-22 has a thrust-to-weight ratio of approximately 1.08, enabling supercruise capabilities and unmatched maneuverability, Maestro recited, his eyes scanning the aircraft with something approaching reverence. "I've calculated that our chances of actually flying one are approximately 12.7%, Doc added. "Budget cuts have limited new pilot assignments." "Always the optimist, Doc," Smokey clapped him on the shoulder. "My grandfather always said statistics are just numbers that haven't met Thornberry determination yet." As they approached the F-22, they noticed a group of pilots in flight suits standing nearby, their patches identifying them as actual Raptor pilots. The contrast was immediate. While our trainees carried themselves with the confidence of youth and potential, these pilots exuded the quiet assurance that comes only from experience. "Check out the real deal," Rook murmured. "Those guys have actually flown combat missions." "They look normal," Doc observed, sounding disappointed. "What were you expecting?" "Capes and laser vision," Glitch asked, though she too was studying the pilots with interest. "I just thought they'd look more legendary," Doc admitted. "Legends are made, not born," Smokey said, uncharacteristically serious. "That's what my grandfather always said." "Your grandfather said a lot of things," Maestro noted. "Statistically speaking, some of them must have been wise by pure chance." "Let's go talk to them," Smokey suggested, already moving forward. "Wait! What?" Maestro hissed, grabbing Smokey's arm. "We can't just approach active Raptor pilots. We're still trainees. We haven't even completed basic jet training." "They put their flight suits on one leg at a time, just like we do," Smokey replied, shaking free. "Besides, how else are we going to learn?" Before anyone could stop him, Smokey had approached the group of pilots, his hand extended. "Lieutenant James Thornberry, sir." My friends and I are in training at Randolph. Just wanted to say it's an honor to see the Raptor up close." The pilots turned, their expressions a mix of amusement and evaluation as they took in the group of eager trainees. The oldest among them, a major with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes, shook Smokey's hand. "Major David Dock, 95th Fighter Squadron," he introduced himself. "You kids are still in training, huh? How's Phantom treating you?" Smokey's eyes widened. "You know Phantom?" Major Dock laughed. "Everyone knows Phantom. He washed me out of fighter training 20 years ago. Best thing that ever happened to me. Made me work twice as hard when I reapplied." The other pilots nodded, each with their own Phantom story. As they talked, the initial awkwardness faded, replaced by the camaraderie that exists between those who share the same passion, regardless of experience level. Legends were recognized. "So you're Walter Wraith Thornberry's grandson?" one of the younger pilots asked Smokey. "Your grandfather was a legend. That story about him landing an F-4 with no hydraulics and one engine out during a thunderstorm is still taught in emergency procedures." "That's actually one of his tamer stories," Smokey grinned. "You should hear about the time he—" "Please don't encourage him," Maestro interrupted. "His grandfather's stories increase in both duration and improbability when validated by outside sources." The pilots laughed, and even Maestro cracked a small smile. "And you must be Alexander Terwilliger's grandson," Major Dock said, turning to Maestro. "The calculator, right? Your grandfather wrote half the precision bombing procedures we still use today." Maestro straightened, clearly pleased by the recognition. "Yes, sir, though I prefer to focus on my own achievements rather than family legacy." "Says the guy who quotes his grandfather's flight manual in his sleep," Smokey Stage whispered, earning a glare from Maestro and more laughter from the pilots. "Listen," Major Dock said, checking his watch. "We've got a briefing in 10, but why don't you kids come find us after the Thunderbirds demonstration? We can give you some unofficial advice about surviving training." "That would be statistically beneficial to our career progression," Doc blurted out. "What he means is, thank you, that would be awesome," Rook translated. As the pilots walked away, Smokey turned to his friends with a triumphant grin. "See? Just like us. Only with more flight hours and better patches. An actual combat experience, advanced training, and the ability to fly aircraft that cost more than the GDP of small nations," Maestro added. "Details," Smokey waved dismissively. "The point is, that's us in a few years." "Assuming we survive your adventures," Glitch noted, but she was smiling. The morning passed quickly as they explored the static displays. Tank surprised everyone with his detailed knowledge of World War II aircraft, speaking more words at once than they'd ever heard from him as he explained the engineering brilliance of the P-51 Mustang. At 1100, they found spots along the flight line for the vintage aircraft demonstration. A gleaming P-51 roared down the runway, followed by a Spitfire, a Corsair, and other legendary warbirds. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, detailing the specifications and history of each aircraft as they performed graceful passes and formation flying. "Imagine flying one of those," Smokey said wistfully as the P-51 executed a perfect barrel roll. No computers, no fly-by-wire, just you and the machine. And a 15.8% higher fatality rate due to mechanical failures and limited safety systems, Doc added. "But 100% more soul," Smokey countered. "My grandfather said—" "If you start another grandfather story, I will physically restrain you," Maestro threatened. "You could try," Smokey grinned. "But you'd need Tank's help, and he's too busy admiring that Corsair." Indeed, Tank stood transfixed as the Corsair demonstrated its distinctive whistling dive, his usual stoic expression replaced by something approaching childlike wonder. "I've never seen him so emotive," Rook observed. "Everyone has their passion," Smokey replied. "Even Tank." As the vintage demonstration concluded, they made their way to the food vendors. Smokey insisted on buying lunch for everyone, producing a wad of cash that made Maestro's eyes narrow suspiciously. "Please tell me you didn't steal Thunder's money too," he said. "Of course not," Smokey looked offended. "This is my own money. I won it fair and square in last week's poker game with the maintenance crew. The one Phantom specifically prohibited after the incident with the fire extinguisher and the base commander's hat, Rook asked. That's the one, Smokey confirmed cheerfully. Now, who wants nachos? At 12:30, they found themselves watching the civilian aerobatics competition. The pilots, flying everything from custom-built biplanes to sleek composite aircraft, performed maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, and certainly defied military flight regulations. That's a negative 4G inverted dive with a transitional roll, Maestro observed as a red biplane performed a particularly complex sequence. The structural stress on the airframe must be approaching critical limits. Yeah, but look at the precision, Smokey countered, genuinely impressed. That guy's flying like the aircraft is an extension of his body. The civilian pilots appear to prioritize artistic expression over tactical efficiency, Glitch noted, her fingers flying over her tablet as she recorded data points. Sometimes flying isn't about efficiency, Smokey said. Sometimes it's about pushing boundaries, finding the edge of what's possible. A philosophy that explains your simulator crash rate, Maestro remarked dryly. I prefer to think of them as educational outcomes rather than crashes, Smokey replied. As the competition continued, they found themselves genuinely impressed by the civilian pilots' skills. These weren't military aviators with millions of dollars of training and equipment. They were passionate individuals who flew for the pure love of flight, often in aircraft they had built or restored themselves. My grandfather would have loved this, Smokey said quietly, watching a middle-aged woman in a yellow pit special execute a perfect sequence of Lomchevaks. He always said the best pilots are the ones who never forget why they fell in love with flying in the first place. That's actually profound, Maestro admitted, looking slightly disturbed by the realization. I have my moments, Smokey grinned. At 13:45, they joined the growing crowd along the flight line for the main event. The anticipation was palpable as the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, introducing the United States Air Force Thunderbirds. In the distance, 6 F-16 Fighting Falcons appeared, approaching in perfect diamond formation. Here they come, Smokey said unnecessarily, his voice hushed with rare reverence. The Thunderbirds roared overhead, so precise in their formation that they appeared to be a single unit rather than 6 separate aircraft. The crowd erupted in cheers as the jets broke formation, each executing a different maneuver before rejoining with split-second timing. For once, even Smokey was silent, watching with undisguised awe as the demonstration team performed maneuvers that made their training exercises look like child's play. Beside him, Maestro's usual critical expression had been replaced by one of pure appreciation for the mathematical precision on display. The synchronization is perfect, he murmured. Not a millisecond of deviation. Years of practice, Rook replied, her eyes tracking the aircraft as they performed a mirror formation pass, inverted. And natural talent, Smokey added. You can't teach that kind of feel for an aircraft. Actually, studies suggest that precision formation flying is 82.7% practice and 17.3% innate spatial awareness, Doc began, but fell silent as the Thunderbirds executed their signature bomb burst maneuver, 6 aircraft exploding outward from a central point like a firework. Beautiful, Tank said simply, and no one disagreed. As the demonstration continued, our heroes watched with a mixture of professional appreciation and personal aspiration. These were the elite of their chosen profession, the standard to which they all secretly measured themselves. The gap between their current abilities and what they were witnessing was vast, but not insurmountable. With enough training, dedication, and perhaps a touch of the madness that drives all great pilots, they too might someday approach this level of mastery. We're going to fly like that someday, Smokey said with quiet determination. All of us. Statistically unlikely, Doc replied automatically, then paused. But not impossible. I've calculated the training hours required, Glitch added. Approximately 1,500 flight hours with specialized formation training. Worth it, Tank nodded. For once, Maestro said, I find myself in complete agreement with Thornberry. though I would approach the training with considerably more structure and less reliance on feeling the aircraft. And I'd approach it with less spreadsheets and more intuition, Smokey countered. But we'd both get there. Different paths, same destination, Rook summarized. They fell silent again as the Thunderbirds completed their final maneuver, a low pass in tight formation that seemed to compress the air itself, leaving a wake of awe and inspiration behind them. After the Thunderbirds demonstration, they reconnected with Major Doc and his fellow Raptor pilots as promised. The conversation flowed easily, with the experienced pilots sharing stories of their own training days, the triumphs, the failures, and the lessons learned from both. "The thing they don't tell you in training," Major Doc said, leaning in conspiratorially, "is that everyone, and I mean everyone, thinks they're going to wash out at some point. Even the best pilots have moments of doubt." "Even you, sir?" Doc asked. "Especially me," Doc laughed. "I crashed 3 simulators my first month. My instructors started a betting pool on how long I'd last." "Sounds familiar," Rook said, glancing meaningfully at Smokey. "Let me guess," one of the other pilots, a captain with a scar along his jawline, pointed at Smokey. "You're the squadron's wildcard, the one who either pulls off the impossible or creates new categories of incident reports." "That's disturbingly accurate," Maestro admitted. "Every squadron has one," the captain shrugged. "Sometimes they wash out. Sometimes they become the pilot everyone wants on their wing when things go sideways." "And you," he continued, turning to Maestro, "you're the by-the-book perfectionist who can recite regulations in your sleep and never met a procedure you couldn't optimize." Maestro straightened. "I prefer technically precise." The pilots laughed. "We had one of you too," Major Doc said. "He's now the Air Combat Command's Chief of Standardization. Drives everyone crazy with his attention to detail, but no one flies a more perfect mission profile." As the conversation continued, our heroes began to see themselves not as unique snowflakes, but as part of a long tradition of military aviators. Their personalities, their strengths and weaknesses, their conflicts and collaborations had precedence in the generations of pilots who had come before them. "The best advice I can give you," Major Doc said as they prepared to leave, "is to learn from each other. The wildcard needs the precision guy's planning. The precision guy needs the wildcard's adaptability. You'll all be better pilots if you stop competing and start collaborating." "That's what Phantom keeps telling us," Rook admitted. "Then Phantom's smarter than he was in my day," Doc laughed. "Back then, he just screamed until we figured it out ourselves." "He still does that," Smokey assured him. "The screaming is very much still part of his teaching methodology." "Some traditions never die," Doc smiled. "Good luck, Lieutenants. Maybe we'll fly together someday." As they walked away, Smokey looked thoughtful, an expression that immediately made Maestro suspicious. "What are you plotting now?" he asked. "Nothing," Smokey replied innocently. "Just thinking about what Major Doc said, about learning from each other." "A statistically sound approach," Glitch noted. "Diverse skill sets create resilient teams." "Exactly," Smokey nodded. "So maybe when we get back, we should—" He was interrupted by a commotion near the parking area. As they approached, they saw a crowd gathered around Thunder's distinctive red Eldorado. In the center of the crowd stood a man in his 60s, running his hand reverently along the car's fender. "Finest example I've seen in years," the man was saying. "The 67 Eldorado convertible, special order with the performance package. They only made 12 in this configuration." "That's our car," Smokey whispered, nudging the others. "Well, Thunder's car. That we borrowed." "Who is that?" Rook asked. "According to my facial recognition software, that's retired General James Westfield, former Thunderbird lead and classic car collector," Glitch replied, her fingers flying over her tablet. "He owns 37 vintage automobiles and has been searching for a 67 Eldorado in this exact specification for 11 years. "This is bad," Doc muttered. "The statistical probability of escaping notice just dropped to 12.3%. "Actually, this might be good," Smokey said, a familiar gleam in his eye. "Follow my lead." Before anyone could stop him, Smokey approached the crowd, slipping through until he reached the Eldorado. "Afternoon, sir," he said to the retired general. I see you're admiring our ride." General Westfield turned, his expert eye immediately cataloguing Smokey's youth and confidence. "Your ride? Son, this car is older than you are." "Yes, sir," Smokey agreed smoothly. "It belongs to our instructor, Captain Wilson Thunder. He let us borrow it for the air show." "Thunder?" Westfield's eyebrows shot up. "The crazy Swede who flew that impossible extraction mission in the Balkans? With the thunderstorm and the mountain pass?" "The very same, sir," Smokey confirmed, silently thanking whatever deity had provided this perfect connection. "Well, I'll be damned," Westfield laughed. "I trained that lunatic. Nearly washed him out 3 times for excessive enthusiasm. How is he?" "Enthusiastic as ever, sir," Smokey replied, doing a passable imitation of Thunder's booming voice that made his friends wince and the crowd laugh. "I bet he is," Westfield chuckled. "Listen, I've been looking for an Eldorado like this for years. If Thunder ever wants to sell, you tell him Jim Westfield will pay top dollar. No haggling, no inspection. Just name the price." "I'll be sure to tell him, sir," Smokey promised, though he's pretty attached to Mjolnir on wheels. "Of course he named it that," Westfield rolled his eyes. "Well, enjoy the show, kids, and tell Thunder that Jim says he still owes me for that night in Bangkok." As the retired general walked away and the crowd dispersed, Smokey turned to his friends with a triumphant grin. "See? Problem solved." "Problem solved," Maestro hissed. "We just had a conversation with a retired general about the car we stole." "Borrowed," Smokey corrected. "And yes, problem solved. Now we have a great story to tell Thunder when we get back." "You're going to tell him?" Rook asked incredulously. "Of course!" Smokey looked surprised. "We borrowed his car, met his former instructor, and got him a standing offer if he ever wants to sell. That's not a court-martial offence, that's a favour." "Your ability to reframe potential disasters as positive outcomes is both statistically improbable and oddly impressive," Glitch observed. "It's a gift," Smokey agreed modestly. As the sun began to set, they reluctantly headed back to the Eldorado for the return journey. The day had been a success by any measure. They'd seen incredible flying, met actual combat pilots, and gained perspective on their own training journey. Even Maestro had to admit that the borrowed car adventure had been worth the risk. "I've been thinking," Smokey said as they cruised back toward Randolph, the top down, the evening air cool on their faces. "Today was good. We should do more things like this." "Things that involve Grand Theft Auto?" Maestro asked dryly. "Things that involve us being together outside of training," Smokey clarified. "We're going to be a team someday, flying missions together. Maybe we should start acting like one now." "A statistically sound approach," Doc nodded. "Team cohesion increases mission success rates by approximately 34.7%. "I could hack the training schedule to identify optimal team-building opportunities," Glitch offered. "And I could develop a strategic plan for progressive skill integration," Rook added. "Food," Tank contributed, which everyone understood to mean he was on board with team dinners. "So we're agreed?" Smokey asked, glancing around at his friends, because that's what they were now, he realized. Not just fellow trainees or reluctant accomplices in his schemes, but friends. "Agreed," they chorused, even Maestro, though he immediately added, "but next time we're taking public transportation." "No promises," Smokey grinned, gunning the engine as they hit the open highway. "My grandfather always said the journey matters more than the destination." "Your grandfather said a lot of things," Maestro sighed, "but occasionally he might have been right." As the Eldorado ate up the miles back to base, our heroes fell into comfortable conversation, reliving the day's highlights and planning future adventures. They were still trainees, still learning, still making mistakes. But today, they had glimpsed their future, both in the elite pilots they had met and in each other. Different paths, same destination. And the journey, as Smokey's grandfather apparently said, was what mattered most. Epilogue. Chariot's return. Thunder stood in the parking lot, hands planted firmly on his hips, examining his beloved Eldorado with the scrutiny of a warrior inspecting his battle-worn armor. The magnificent chariot was exactly where he had left it, though the odometer showed an additional 127 miles and there was a small Thunderbird sticker affixed to the dashboard that hadn't been there before. "What glorious adventures have you experienced in my absence, noble steed?" he boomed, circling the vehicle with appreciative strides. A slow, delighted grin spread across his face as he noticed a handwritten note tucked under the windshield wiper. He plucked it with surprising delicacy for hands that could bend metal, unfolding it to find Smokey's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Major Borg, borrowed your chariot for Operation Airshow. Your mighty Eldorado performed admirably in battle. Also, your old instructor Jim Westfield says you still owe him for Bangkok and wants to buy your car. Thanks for the adventure." Future of aviation. Thunder's laughter erupted like a volcanic explosion, echoing across the parking lot with such force that a flock of birds took flight from a nearby tree in startled formation. "Magnificent!" he declared to the heavens, arms spread wide as if addressing the gods themselves. "The young warriors show true Asgardian spirit. They have proven themselves worthy." He carefully refolded the note with the reverence one might show an ancient scroll and tucked it into his breast pocket, patting it twice for good measure. "A fine tale to add to the saga of Borg," he proclaimed, running an affectionate hand along the Eldorado's hood. "Your metal hide has carried heroes to glorious victory." As he climbed into the driver's seat, his massive frame making the substantial car seem suddenly smaller, he noticed something else. The radio had been preset to a new station, one playing classic rock instead of his usual Viking metal. He started the Eldorado, and AC/DC's Thunderstruck immediately blasted from the speakers with window-rattling intensity. "Ah! The Anthem of Thunder!" he exclaimed with unbridled joy, turning the volume knob until it could go no further. "Young Thornberry understands the importance of proper battle music." The engine roared to life under his command, and Thunder nodded with satisfaction, as if the car were a loyal steed responding to its master's call. "Onward, mighty Eldorado!" he bellowed, shifting into drive with theatrical flair. "Let us return to the halls of Aviation Valhalla, where more legends await creation." As the Eldorado peeled out of the parking lot, leaving impressive tyre marks in its wake, Thunder's booming voice could be heard singing along to AC/DC with enthusiastic if imprecise lyrics, the sound carrying across the base like distant artillery fire. Several junior officers diving for cover as he passed could have sworn they heard him shout, "That's how Borg drives!" followed by what might have been the most thunderous laugh ever to echo across the Texas plains.